Jon Moxley returns at SummerSlam 2025 and confronts Paul Heyman. WWE will never be the same. Jon Moxley shocked the WWE Universe with an unannounced return during the SummerSlam 2025 kickoff show, and he didn't come back quietly. In a jaw-dropping moment, Moxley confronted none other than Paul Heyman, and what happened next left fans speechless. This wasn't just a homecoming, it was a declaration of war. SummerSlam 2025 was already shaping up to be a historic night. The stadium was sold out. The crowd was electric. And fans had no idea that they were about to witness a return that would shake the very foundations of WWE. For weeks, the speculation had centered around titles, betrayals, and who would walk out as champions. But what happened during the kickoff show stunned even the most seasoned WWE watchers. Without any warning, without fanfare, Jon Moxley, the lunatic fringe, the outlaw, the exiled warrior, walked through the gates of the WWE again. And he wasn't smiling. He wasn't here to relive the glory days. He was here for Paul Heyman. And as the cameras cut to the backstage area, fans watched in disbelief as Moxley, dressed in a black leather jacket and with fire in his eyes, marched straight toward the man who had masterminded more chaos in recent memory than anyone else. The confrontation wasn't planned. At least, that's what WWE officials claim. But nothing about Moxley's return felt manufactured. This wasn't the product of a clever marketing campaign or an overhyped tease. It was raw. It was real. And for a moment, it felt like the lines between storyline and reality were completely blurred. Heyman, who was moments away from heading to the ring for a special segment, froze in place when he saw Moxley standing across from him. Cameras rushed to capture every second as Moxley slowly stepped forward, stopping inches from Heyman's face. The tension was unbearable. You could hear a pin drop in the production truck. Moxley didn't say a word at first. He just stared, that intense, unnerving glare that only he could deliver. And then, with a voice low and steady, he said the words that would echo through the wrestling world for weeks. "You thought I'd stay gone forever?" The context made it all the more shocking. Jon Moxley hadn't been seen on WWE programming since his contract expired years ago. His journey had taken him across continents, to bloody wars in Japan, to steel cage massacres in AEW, and to death matches that tested the very limits of the human body. But his departure from WWE had always felt unfinished. There was no farewell tour, no closure. Just silence. And now, standing in front of Paul Heyman, the mastermind behind Roman Reigns' dominance, the architect of the Bloodline, and the alleged puppet master pulling strings even behind Seth Rollins' new faction, Moxley wasn't just returning for nostalgia. He was returning to rip the roots of corruption out of the WWE machine. Paul Heyman, ever the strategist, tried to regain control. He raised a hand to Moxley and began to speak, but Moxley cut him off instantly. "Don't talk. Just listen." The camera zoomed in on Heyman's eyes. For the first time in a long time, the wise man looked genuinely shaken. Moxley continued, "I watched what you did to Roman. I watched what you did to Seth. I watched how you broke them both from the shadows. But you forgot something. You forgot there's still one piece of the old world you never buried." It was a chilling statement. In that moment, it became clear Jon Moxley wasn't just targeting Heyman. He was here to expose him, to burn down everything that Paul Heyman had built. And most terrifying of all, he was doing it on his own terms. Security quickly emerged from the corners of the hallway, unsure whether they were walking into a promo or a war. Moxley backed up slowly, never taking his eyes off Heyman, and uttered one final line before turning away. "Tell the devil I'm back." Then he disappeared into the shadows of the arena, leaving behind a stunned silence and a visibly rattled Heyman. The entire segment lasted less than 5 minutes, but it was all anyone could talk about for the rest of the night. Fans on social media exploded with theories, reactions, and emotional tributes to Moxley's legacy. Twitter trended worldwide with hashtags like #MoxleyReturns, #HeymanConfrontation, and #WWE will never be the same. But even beyond the digital chaos, the real shockwaves were being felt backstage. Wrestlers were seen peeking around corners, whispering among themselves, and texting each other frantically. The atmosphere had shifted. SummerSlam had turned into something much bigger than title matches and pyrotechnics. A storm was brewing. For those who knew Jon Moxley personally, his return wasn't just a surprise, it was a warning. Moxley wasn't the same man who once stormed through arenas with Roman and Seth as the Shield's silent assassin. He had evolved, hardened, broken and rebuilt through barbed wire, betrayal, and brawls that defied sanity. This version of Moxley didn't come back to reclaim glory. He came back to confront the machine that he believed corrupted the soul of WWE. And standing at the center of that machine was Paul Heyman. Triple H reportedly called an emergency meeting immediately following the segment. Rumors began circulating that Moxley's return had not been approved through normal channels. Some insiders claimed he appeared at the building hours before the show and refused to leave. Others believe his return was negotiated quietly by a small group within WWE Creative, a shock debut designed to reignite the product in the wake of falling ratings and a fractured fanbase. Either way, one thing was certain, this wasn't a cameo. This was a declaration of war. As the main card of SummerSlam progressed, tension lingered in the air. Every backstage segment felt colder. Every match was met with a hushed curiosity. Was Moxley still in the building? Would he strike again before the night was over? Commentators treaded lightly around the confrontation, unsure of how much they were allowed to say. But when they did speak of it, the words were clear. Jon Moxley is back. And he's gunning for Paul Heyman. Meanwhile, in the locker rooms, chaos was unfolding. Superstars aligned with Heyman's various factions were seen scrambling. Some were pulling out of interviews. Others refused to speak on the record. Seth Rollins, still recovering from injury and sidelined from in-ring action, reportedly left the arena early. Roman Reigns, who had only recently begun his own return campaign, was nowhere to be seen. The Bloodline appeared fragmented. Seth's new group, rumored to be operating under Heyman's mentorship, suddenly looked vulnerable. One man's return had cracked the foundation. The question on everyone's mind, what happens next? Because Jon Moxley never returns to play nice. He returns to destroy. And based on his silence and the fury behind those cold, unblinking eyes, his mission was only just beginning. Throughout WWE's long history, there have been many returns. Some are triumphant, others nostalgic. But every once in a while, a return comes along that changes everything. This was that moment. Moxley's reappearance was not designed to warm hearts or stir old memories. It was an act of rebellion. A reminder that, even in a corporate, structured WWE world, there are still forces of chaos that cannot be tamed. Paul Heyman may be a genius. He may be a manipulator of unmatched brilliance. But on that night, for those few terrifying minutes, he was no longer in control. He was being hunted. And Jon Moxley? He had nothing to lose. The fallout from Moxley's return was immediate. Within minutes of the segment airing, the entire WWE locker room was in a frenzy. Producers, agents, and talent alike were scrambling to make sense of what they had just witnessed. According to multiple backstage sources, the production team had only been given a vague heads-up that something big was going to happen during the kickoff show. But no one expected Jon Moxley, especially not like this. No music, no lights, no grand entrance. Just fury, silence, and an unspoken promise of destruction. Triple H was said to be livid not because Moxley had returned, but because of how blindsided the entire operation had been. And yet, there was a glimmer in his eye. That same glimmer that's always accompanied moments when WWE edges into unpredictability. Moxley had brought back danger to the product. And in an era of carefully crafted storylines and sanitized promos, that danger was electric. The writer's room was reportedly flipped upside down. Every planned feud, every ongoing arc that involved Paul Heyman was now under review. What role would Moxley play in the weeks to come? Would he be a lone wolf? Was this the start of a broader invasion? The answers weren't clear, not even to those at the top. What was clear, though, was that Heyman's iron grip on the company's main storylines had been violently challenged. And no one was more aware of that than Paul himself. That night, Heyman refused all interviews. He exited the building with a small team of security and did not return for the main event. For someone who usually thrives in the spotlight, his absence spoke volumes. Fans outside the stadium began chanting Moxley's name. Inside, the energy was different, raw, tense, and unfiltered. This wasn't the pop of a returning hero. It was the rallying cry of a rebellion. A dangerous, unchained force had returned to the WWE, and fans were loving every second of it. Reddit threads exploded with speculation. Was Moxley back full-time? Was this part of a wider Shield reunion? Was Roman Reigns involved? Or was Moxley here to destroy everything they had all built, from Seth's rise as the visionary to Roman's reign as the tribal chief? And then came the questions no one wanted to ask aloud. What does this mean for AEW? For years, Moxley had been the face of AEW's grit, its blood-soaked standard-bearer. His departure from WWE had been marked by bitterness, frustration, and a refusal to play by the rules. He had called out the system. He had walked away from the machine. For him to now walk back into that same machine and target Paul Heyman, of all people, raised more questions than answers. Was this a one-night deal? Was this a power move between wrestling promotions? Or had something deeper, darker been brewing all along? Sources close to Moxley's camp remained tight-lipped. But whispers began to surface. That Moxley had been watching. That for months, he had seen Heyman manipulate every storyline to his own benefit. That the fall of Roman, the injuries to Seth, even the elevation of new superstars like Bronson Reed and Braun Breaker under Heyman's guidance had crossed a line. Moxley, the ultimate anti-authority figure, had finally decided to intervene. Back in the production truck, the decision was made to replay the segment during the main show. Not once, but 3 times. Each replay was met with thunderous cheers from the live audience. This wasn't a manufactured moment. It was a shot of adrenaline straight to the heart of WWE. A reawakening. A reminder that professional wrestling at its core is about moments that feel real, unscripted, uncontrollable, and unforgettable. Meanwhile, backstage, the politics were heating up. Several stars who had aligned themselves with Heyman, both on-screen and behind the scenes, were now facing uncertainty. Would they be collateral damage in Moxley's war? Would Heyman retaliate? Or would he try to make peace with a man who had never been interested in peace? One producer was overheard saying, "This is either the best thing to happen to us in 5 years, or the beginning of total chaos." Maybe it was both. Later in the night, during a backstage digital exclusive segment, cameras caught a glimpse of Moxley again. He was sitting in a dimly lit hallway, taping his wrists, surrounded by silence. A producer approached him and asked if he planned on going to the ring. Moxley didn't look up. He simply muttered, "I don't plan. I act." Then he stood up and walked out of frame. The message was clear. Moxley wasn't back to follow a script. He was back to write his OWN.B. By the time the main event of SummerSlam rolled around, the entire night had been overshadowed by one 5-minute confrontation. It didn't matter who won or lost in the title matches. The headlines had already been written. The images had already gone viral. Jon Moxley had returned. And nothing would be the same again. In the days following SummerSlam, WWE issued a short, cryptic statement acknowledging Moxley's appearance. WWE was as surprised as our fans to see Jon Moxley at SummerSlam 2025. "We are currently reviewing the circumstances of his appearance." That was it. No further details. No confirmation of a contract. No future appearances announced. Just silence. And in that silence, the anticipation grew. Paul Heyman, for his part, disappeared from television the following week. Rumors circulated that he had taken time off for personal matters, but insiders believed it was part of a larger strategy. A retreat to regroup. To analyze. To prepare. Because if there's one thing everyone knows about Paul Heyman, it's that he never allows himself to be caught off guard twice. But what about Roman Reigns? The tribal chief, long protected, long revered, had not publicly addressed Heyman's growing manipulations. Nor had he made any statement about Seth Rollins' injury or the factional chaos erupting across Raw and SmackDown. But if there was one return that could draw Roman Reigns out of the shadows, it was this one. Jon Moxley wasn't just a rival. He was family. He was blood. Could we be heading towards something even bigger? A war not just between Moxley and Heyman, but between the ghosts of the Shield and the modern-day empire Heyman helped build? Would Roman stand by Heyman's side? Or would he, too, begin to question the direction everything had taken? Would Seth, if and when he returned, join the fight? Or would the fractured bond between these three men only deepen? The WWE Universe was left to wonder. Because for the first time in years, the most dangerous man in wrestling had returned home. Not to be cheered, not to be honored, but to tear everything down. And with every step he takes, with every word he doesn't say, Jon Moxley sends a message: you can try to forget the past, but sometimes the past comes back with a vengeance. In the weeks that followed SummerSlam, the tremors of Jon Moxley's return refused to settle. WWE programming became increasingly unpredictable. Segments were cut short, promos interrupted, matches thrown into disarray, all without warning. It wasn't Moxley's physical presence that disrupted the shows. It was the lingering threat of it. Every arena he might walk into, every corridor he might lurk behind, turned into a minefield of tension. Superstars, commentators, and even backstage staff were visibly on edge. He had become a ghost in the machine, and the fear he created was more powerful than any scripted segment WWE had aired in years. Paul Heyman, though absent from television, was very much part of the conversation. His name was whispered in every corner of the WWE universe. Some said he was biding his time. Others believed he was preparing legal retaliation behind the scenes. But a growing number of fans and insiders believed something far more unsettling, that Paul Heyman was scared. Not just of Moxley's return, but of what it symbolized. Because if Jon Moxley could return unannounced, unchecked, and unrepentant, then WWE's entire power structure was vulnerable. And no one embodied that structure more than Heyman. Triple H and WWE management were forced into uncharted waters. On one hand, Moxley's return had sent ratings into the stratosphere. Merchandise sales spiked. Social media metrics exploded. The internet was ablaze with speculation, fan theories, and reaction videos dissecting every frame of the confrontation. But on the other hand, this wasn't just a storyline. This was a disruption. A force they couldn't control. Moxley wasn't negotiating contracts or asking for creative input. He wasn't interested in backstage politics or main event slots. He had declared war, not just on Heyman, but on the very idea that WWE was immune to being shattered. In a moment of rare transparency, Triple H addressed the situation on WWE's official YouTube channel. Sitting in a dimly lit office, looking directly into the camera, he didn't sugarcoat his words. "Jon Moxley is back," he said. "We didn't expect him. We didn't plan it. But we're not going to pretend it didn't happen. He's made his presence felt. And now we wait." It was a simple message, but one that underscored the gravity of the situation. Moxley wasn't part of the script anymore. He was the script. Meanwhile, reports began to surface that Moxley had been seen training in undisclosed locations. Not just in wrestling rings, but in grimy gyms, in isolated combat camps. Word had it he was pushing his body beyond its limits, preparing not just for a return to action, but for a confrontation that would test every fiber of his being. This wasn't about championships. This was about legacy, justice, revenge. Or maybe, for Moxley, something far more primal: balance. Because Paul Heyman had always been the master manipulator. The man who sat beside champions and whispered strategies that shaped eras. He was the architect of dominance: Brock Lesnar, Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins. He had molded them all, shaped their paths, altered destinies. But in that influence, he had also created monsters. He had left wreckage behind, discarded alliances, broken friendships, and men like Moxley, left behind when they no longer fit the vision. Now, one of those men had returned. And this time, He wasn't interested in being repackaged. On a special edition of Raw, the tension boiled over. The show was halfway through when the lights in the arena abruptly dimmed. No music. No video package. Just static. The screen flickered, and for a few seconds, a live feed showed the backstage parking lot. A figure, hooded, alone, was walking through the shadows, dragging a steel chair behind him. The sound of metal scraping against concrete echoed through the stadium. Fans rose to their feet. The figure looked up, pulled down his hood, and there he was, Jon Moxley. He didn't speak. He didn't wave. He just walked. Past confused security guards. Past stunned crew members. And then, he entered the building. Commentators fell silent. The arena crowd roared. The main event, which had just begun, suddenly didn't matter. All eyes were on the screen. Backstage, Paul Heyman was already on the move. WWE cameras scrambled to catch him, flanked by 2 new bodyguards, rushing down a hallway, barking orders into his phone. The fear on his face was real. This was no longer the cerebral strategist. This was a man being hunted, and then, in one of the most surreal moments in Raw history, the 2 paths crossed. A hallway camera caught it, Moxley and Heyman, once again face to face. No grand speeches. No catchphrases. Just breathing. Heavy, labored, uneven. Moxley's steel chair dropped with a metallic thud. Heyman, swallowing hard, managed to mutter, "What do you want?" Moxley stepped forward, his eyes locked on the man who had haunted him from the shadows for years, and whispered, "I want you to feel what we all felt." Then, the screen cut to black. No follow-up. No continuation. WWE went to commercial. When it returned, the show moved on like nothing happened. But the fans knew. Everyone knew. The war had truly begun. Over the following weeks, WWE entered a state of controlled chaos. Segments were interrupted by unannounced appearances. Promos went unscripted. Factions began turning on each other. Whispers of a revolution began circulating.